I'm WTOP's Mike Murillo, and I have MS.
And I'm Nick Irons. I'm a fitness professional, and my dad has MS.
And this is the Mastering MS podcast, where we bring you interviews with great folks, and we have a great one this time.
For 27 years, you've watched him on CNN.
John King, the chief national correspondent, the guy that gets us through all those elections, joins us on this episode of Mastering MS.
We have John King, the chief national correspondent for CNN. And you've been with CNN for a long time.
27 fun years, every day.
Wow. Nice. And we have you on today because you also have multiple sclerosis.
I do. Diagnosed in 2008. It's been a remarkable, sometimes challenging journey.
Take us back with that journey, and that's what we bring people on this podcast to talk about, your journey. I have my own story, and obviously today you're going to share your story about when you found out you had MS. But in doing some prep work on your story, you had the idea that you may have had something going on for years. So take us back to your first indications that maybe you have something going on neurologically that you don't know about.
So the first indication that I had something major going on was I was covering the White House. I covered the White House for 10 years, the second Clinton term, and then the first 6 years of George W. Bush. And Bill Clinton, many people might remember, used to go on summer vacation to Martha's Vineyard. And I'm not a runner, but I do like to exercise. And there were no great gyms on Martha's Vineyard, so I used to jog sometimes. Just take, trust me, I'll call it jogging. It was kind of fast walking. But after one of those jogs on a Clinton trip, this would have been probably 1998. My feet went numb, and it moved up sort of into my calves. And first it was pins and needles, and then it was like almost a total lack of sensation. And I just thought I must have pounded it, must have done something weird. But I talked after it lasted several hours and didn't come back. I talked to one of the White House doctors who was on the trip, and went to the hospital there, took x-rays, and there was nothing. And she suggested I get an MRI. They didn't have MRI technology on the island at that time. And so I actually was stopping in Boston at the end of that work trip to see family. And I went to a hospital in Boston and got an MRI. And there was they didn't find anything at the time. Now they only took it essentially from the knees down, is my memory. And they didn't find anything at the time. And then I had recurring sort of lack of sensation, numbness in my feet. And I flipped a car over once. I have a great car crash story, and I did some damage in the bottom of my spine. And I went to an orthopedic doctor because I would get pain from that every now and then, who just attributed, he thought there had to be some connection to what was happening periodically in my feet, mostly, and lower legs. It had to be some connection to that. And then in 2008, it actually, at the Republican convention, we were in Minnesota for Minneapolis for the Republican National Convention, and it not only moved up. One day it was up into my thighs, and then all the way up into my chest. I had felt really heavy, felt like I was lead. I literally felt like they had poured lead into my body, and it was hard to move it, and it wouldn't do what I wanted it to do. And that got scary, and so I went to a paramedic there. They had at the convention center, who whispered in my ear, "My aunt has MS. I bet you have MS." And I looked at him like, "What planet are you from, dude?" But when the convention was over, I came back to my orthopedic guy, and he said, "Look, there's no way. It's moved. You're now having these problems in areas that have nothing to do with the damage of the discs in the bottom of your spine." And he sent me to a neurologist, and we went through the full MRIs. And lo and behold, my first glimpse at what I call the dry flowers, the lesions in my brain and all down my spine.
So there were 10 years that went by from 98 to 2008. Had you progressed in that time, or do you think any damage had been done in those 10 years?
When I think back on it, the answer is yes. I think I was just stubborn and thought, I'm not working out right, or I'm doing something stupid, or I'm getting a little older. Nothing profound, but a lot of numbness. And it was just hard because I did have for a long time, because of the disc issue, sometimes very violent sciatica-like pain. And so I was having pain and numbness, lack of sensation, difficulty moving in the same areas, right? The pain went down mostly my left leg. And then both of my legs, I was having lack of sensation, difficulty moving. And I stubbornly just put them together and said, well, it has to somehow be the same thing. And of course it was not. And through physical therapy and exercises and really smart help from people, the sciatica thing is gone. It's just they taught me how to sort of stretch out my spine, and that hasn't happened at all. I think yes, I was having some progression. It was not dramatic, but in hindsight, I remember, oh yeah, I had a lot of numbness. Oh yeah, and I just sort of blew it off to stubbornness. Which anybody listening to this, I mean, if things start happening and they get weird to you, just ask somebody, get some help. Don't be like me and be stubborn for too long.
Take us back to that day you got that diagnosis. And one thing we'd like to talk about too, with the podcast, I'm someone who has MS. Nick, actually, his dad has had it for 50 years. Right. So we have two different perspectives here. So I want to go to that family perspective and, talk about your family's role in helping you through that diagnosis.
At the beginning, I was petrified. I mean, I did the worst thing anybody can do, which is I went on the internet, and you start seeing all these things. And I'll say this, this should be incorporated in every answer I give today about how lucky and blessed I feel, because now that I know a lot about MS, yes, I have MS, relapsing remitting MS. I have bad days, I have bad weeks. Sometimes I have horrible days and horrible weeks, but I know how lucky I am. I understand how cruel this disease can be to so many people so quickly and so profoundly. And so, yes, I have challenges. I've learned a lot from them. In some ways, those challenges are a blessing in that they teach you discipline, they teach you patience. I hope they teach you empathy for other people who may be dealing with things that you can't see. The invisible part of this challenge has been fascinating to me. But at the beginning, I was petrified. And you went on the internet and you saw how cruel it can be and how quick it can be cruel to a lot of people. And I thought, oh my God, am I going to be able to play baseball with my kids? Am I going to be able to do my job? Wait a minute, I'm not a great athlete, but I like to be physical and out and about. And I think, is all this going to go away? And so it gets lonely and it gets depressing. And that comes back periodically, no matter how well you're doing. It just does when you face the challenge of it. But at the beginning, I was petrified. And luckily, I had my older kids who are now 30 and 27 were in middle school then. I think my son might have just been starting high school, either 8th or 9th grade. And they were both like, Dad, it'll be okay. What do you need, Dad? What do you need? And they didn't know much about it. I think when they saw that I was frightened, I think they got a little frightened. And so one of the things I think is pretty typical is that you try to shield that, especially if you think it's only a moderately bad day or a medium bad day. You try to keep it from your family. And I think there's a sweet spot there. And I'm a long ways into this journey now, right? 15, 16 years into this journey. And I'm still not sure I know where that spot is of when to tell people I'm having a really bad day. I'm sorry, I can't do that. Or when to say, no, I'm going to mask it and I'm going to try to stubborn my way through it. I think that's an ongoing challenge with yourself. But at the beginning, because I was afraid, and this was stupid, but I was afraid if I told my bosses, they would discriminate against me. Not out of any bad intention, but out of good intentions to protect me. No, you can't go to Iraq. No, you can't be out covering campaigns. No, we don't want you traveling all the time. It's not to protect me that they would say, let's change what you do. So I didn't tell anybody at work. I didn't tell anybody at work for the longest time. And then I told a couple of people who worked very closely with me. So my family knew, and a very handful of close friends knew. They were all incredibly supportive, and they helped me. But it's an isolating, lonely disease anyway sometimes, and I think I made it worse on myself at the beginning because of my fears. And I kept that group so small. They were great, fantastic to me, but I probably could have used a little bit more help.
But when you did tell people, you really told people.
Well, when I told everybody, I had told, yes. So I had increasingly over the years, I told, 3 people here and 4 people there, and more of my broader circle of friends. And then, yes, and then on live television, I told anybody who was watching, and then that was, of course, spread around social media. And that was born of a profound frustration in the middle of COVID of, a certain person who is no longer on a certain network, but prefers to stay on the internet, who apparently has a liking for Vladimir Putin. I think I've been pretty clear about who that person is. Who was saying that, nobody should wear a mask because a mask strips your freedom. And nobody should get a vaccine because it's the government trying to impose its will on you. This is America. We should debate everything. We should have healthy, friendly, respectful, feisty debates about everything, especially government mandates and things like that. But wearing a mask, the drugs we take suppress our immune system. And especially early in COVID, when they didn't quite understand it, there was a huge fear And I think, over the months that sort of changed month to month or quarter to quarter. But especially at the beginning, it was like, oh my God, don't be near anybody. Your immune system is so suppressed. You're going to get COVID like that. And we don't know what COVID does. A mask protects me. A mask might protect the person in front of me or behind me at Starbucks or the grocery store or on the bus or on the subway or on the elevator, who may have MS, may have some other autoimmune disease, may have some other challenge in their life. And I don't know it. And they should not have to wear a sign that says, hey, I'm immunocompromised, stay away from me. It's a simple, the fact that politics got in the way of simple common sense and common decency just sent me over the edge. It was not a plan. It was back here. That debate was, going on for weeks and months. And so what started back here, like, oh my God, this is ridiculous, came up to the front. And then it came out one day right after the vaccines were available and we were allowed to bring people back into the studio. And, you guys, you're sitting in front of microphones. You know what this is like, right? You know what it was like when all of a sudden we couldn't go to work and we couldn't be around people. And a conversation when you can look somebody in the eye is so much better than a conversation even on a flat screen. And so I was so grateful that people could be back around the table on my show at the time, that I was just like, I'm grateful you're here. I'm grateful you got a vaccine. I'm grateful you took steps that, protect me. And so, there was a little bit of frustration and probably a little bit of anger that came out when I told everybody I have MS.
Saying that you were immunocompromised. Did you tell people right at the same time they had MS, or was that later on?
No, in that newscast, my show was Inside Politics at the time. I said I have MS, and I'd never said those words on television before. There were people in my office who didn't know. Nobody at the table that day knew. None of the guests on the show. There were one or two guests on the show who are frequent guests, who are older, long-term friends of mine who knew, but not that day. Nobody at the table had any idea when I said that.
And I bet you got some wonderful response from it.
Again, I said at the beginning when I didn't expand my circle that in hindsight, I think, that was dumb of me. I cost myself a lot of friends and support and help I could have had at the beginning. I was afraid when I said it. I said it on live television. I walked off the set that day thinking, "Oh no, what have you done?" And the response from people who have MS and broader people who have other challenges out there has just like mind blowing. How heartwarming and overwhelming and supportive it was. And one of the reasons I've always been reluctant to talk about this publicly is what I alluded to before, is that, people see me standing up for 14 hours on election night. Trust me, there are days when that is hard. There are days when that is exhausting my brain, because I'm using my brain to make my legs work, and I'm using my brain to make my hands work. And when I'm offset, I collapse. I'm done. But through stubbornness and training and great medications and a great medical team, I'm able to do that. But I'm always worried because it is such a cruel and punishing disease to many people. I don't want people to say, oh, well, it can't be that bad. Look, John King stands there. John King's on television. John King looks fine. I'm worried about that. If you're trying to raise money for MS, you're trying to convince people, this is a serious problem. I was worried that, wait, people need to, that people are going to think it's not so bad. But the response, and I said that in a couple of subsequent interviews after I said on television I have MS, and the response from people who have progressive MS, so many people reached out to me and said, "Oh my God, don't you dare! Keep talking, keep talking, keep nice. Talking, keep helping. We're all in this together, and thank you." And it blew my mind. It blew my mind how wonderful people who face significantly harder challenges than I do, who may not be as lucky as me in terms of I work at a company with a generous prescription drug benefit as part of our healthcare plan. I mean, you both know this. I mean, if you're doing over the counter for these things, you're done. I don't, even upper middle class or reasonably wealthy people would have a hard time if you're paying over the counter price for the medications you have to take here.
I often joke about one of the bills I got, a box wasn't checked or something. So I got the due now payment for one of the treatments. And I said, you do 90-year payment plans? How will this work out?
Right. Yeah, left arm or right arm. And so, as someone who's, I feel very fortunate in terms of the very, very, very slow progression of my disease. And I feel incredibly fortunate, the support network I have, and then the medical and other health benefits I have, that it just made me reluctant, because I think I'm not typical was my worry. And from the MS community, just they essentially told me, sit down, shut up, and keep helping, in a
Right.
in a very polite and friendly way. And I love them for it. And any of you listening, thank you. It really opened my mind, to you can use whatever little platform I might have, to try to help, and to just, again, to try to tell people, look, the person in front of you, you might get you frustrated sometimes. Person's walking a little slowly. You're trying to get around them. You're trying to get somewhere. They might be having a little trouble, getting things out of their bag or getting up the stairs or something like that. And we're all human, and you're gonna growl on that day. I think John King now, compared to John King 15 years ago, has a lot better way to say, just calm down, dude. It's going to cost you 3 seconds. Relax. That person may, and maybe even say, can I help you? If you see someone who's struggling, is there anything I can do to help you? That is the blessing of the challenge, that you understand so much better what you're going through and what you're trying to hide from other people on your bad days, that I hope it makes me more aware and more empathetic, that, what, that person next to me, maybe they're going through the same thing. Maybe they're having a worse day, a tougher day than I am. So just chill.
Nice.
Yeah, talk about, and I'm sure you have these days too. I call them MS days, where, the one thing with MS, right? We can look, as you've alluded to, we can look perfectly fine, but feel like hell. Really, that's just really what it comes down to. Talk about some of those moments in your head where people might not realize, you were having one of those days, and how you kind of coped your way through it.
I always say my friend is visiting. My friend is visiting, and sometimes my friend comes for a couple hours, and sometimes my friend comes for a week. It's different. Sometimes it is the sensation. I haven't been able to really feel from my thighs down since Bill Clinton was president.
Wow.
And it's always there. And so every day in bed in the morning, I'm going to use my hands. But you wake up, and before I get out of bed, I move my ankles. Right? How am I doing here? How hard is that? Is it easy? Is it natural? Is it reflexive? Or do I have to make it happen? That's my test every morning before I get out of bed. And then, if I wobble sometimes when I first get up, and I'm sure when people see me walk across, if I'm sitting at my desk like this for a long period of time and I stand up, I'm shaky for the first couple seconds, because I have to okay, where am I? And just sort of get my rhythm. And some days it takes 3 steps, and some days it might take 20 steps. There are some days I fall, or I'll, if distractions can do it. For me, everyone's different. I've learned that too about MS. For me, loud noises, a certain kind of like a staticky kind of a white noise kind of thing, somehow rattles my brain, and sometimes that causes me to get like vertigo-like symptoms, and I'll get dizzy and sometimes fall. You learn to fall. You learn to try to land better.
You do.
But for me, it's mostly the most dramatic thing for me is the MS exhaustion. The MS fatigue, that when you're having a challenging day where any movement is hard, you're using your brain to hold that glass, type those words, touch the magic wall, what I do on election nights, stay standing, move across the room. And what comes naturally and reflexive and normal, things that nobody thinks about when you pick up your coffee and take a sip, when you walk across a room, when you punch your keyboard, you don't think you're thinking about it. Of course you are, but you don't think you are, because it's so natural what you're doing. They're hard, and so some days after that, I'm just exhausted, and you learn a lot about the human brain. This is not a scientific analysis of the human brain, but I marvel at days. I will pull into my driveway someday, and literally as I'm turning the lock on my door and stepping into my house, I feel it all come out of my body, because my brain knows I can lie down. And I will hit my bed, and maybe it's 20 minutes or maybe it's an hour, but I don't move. My batteries need to recharge. And it's more my brain just needs a rest from telling my body what to do. That's the worst for me.
Has it happened while you were standing in front of the big wall for 14 hours on election night?
I'm very lucky. Through my doctor just says I'm stubborn. Election week in America in 2020, when we had election week in America, and it took till Saturday, and we were on TV 12, 15 hours a day, and I'm standing most of those days, most of that time. I was having a really tough week that week. Where it was all the way into my hands, and it's a touch screen the magic wall is a touch screen. I couldn't feel my fingertips.
Oh, wow.
And so I had to look. If you go back and look, I can see it. Dana Bash, who's a close colleague of mine, who's my ex-wife, but we're dear friends, and we are co-parents to an amazing son. She knows. And so she was texting me from across the studio, "Are you okay?" Because she would just see these moments where she could see I was a little shaky. Nobody else had any idea. I don't know if viewers did, but if I go back and look at the tape, I can see normally I just reach and touch. I know where it is. Like you do it out of the corner of your eye. I'm going to touch Pennsylvania, then I'm going to go down here to Bucks County, then I'm going to swerve it out. If you watch the tape, you can see my eyes more staring, like to making sure that am I really doing what I think I'm doing, because I can't feel it. And that week was exhausting, and I was probably never more proud. It sounds silly. I don't need a gold star. Others go through much tougher challenges, but I was really proud at my stubbornness, because there were a couple of mornings where I said, you think about it, because you're on live television. We're in the middle of this climate from a journalist perspective, as you remember, where one of the candidates was saying the whole thing was rigged. And so you got to be on top of your game. You got to be factual. You have to explain clearly why these votes are coming in late, why the results are changing. It was an incredibly important moment for what we do professionally. And I had to think a couple of mornings, like, can I do it? Am I up to doing this? And I actually called. I talked to Dano a couple times that week. I called other friends that week. And I was like, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And they were like, just give it a try, and just don't be afraid to raise your hand if you can't, because I didn't want to get mechanically or intellectually, because you get tired. The MS fatigue, just your brain feels like it weighs 1,000,000 pounds. I wanted to make sure I could do it, and I got through it. And when it was Saturday morning, when we finally called it, when Wolf and I were in the studio, and the second we got a break, I went out in the hall, and I was just like, let out
the rest of America was also.
Yeah. I let out this breath, and I was just like, okay, made it.
Nice.
I want to ask you too, when it comes to tips you'd give to other people who go through that horrible trek of figuring out what you have, this being scared. As a reporter too, I did the exact same thing as you did. But I think most people do, right? You go try to take everything that's online and bring it all in to try to understand it. But sometimes that's not the best recipe for success. But what advice would you give to that person who is recently diagnosed, who was in that place we were, and maybe learn from our mistakes?
Find me if you need somebody to talk to. This stresses relationships. It stresses, partnerships, husband, wife, spouses, partners, stresses parental relationships, can stress work and friendships, because suddenly you're nervous about things, or suddenly you say you can't do something, or you're worried about doing something that has been very special in that relationship, and suddenly you don't want to go out to dinner as much, or you can't do this physical activity that was part of it, and that gets very lonely and very isolating. So look, I'm not going to impose my views on others, but when you're that scared, find somebody, and if you're afraid to talk to somebody in your inner circle, through your doctor or through a friend, or through some MS network, and there's an amazing group of people out there. Just find somebody, like, what was this like for you? And then fit that to you. What happened to me, what happens to you, is not going to be someone else's exact experience, but they can learn little things from us, because the disease is different for everybody too, which is part of the frustrating part, that nobody's going through exactly the same thing. But find somebody. I blocked myself out from that. It was the biggest mistake I made at the beginning, from finding people who actually understood this, who were living it, and some people who were struggling, and other people who are thriving. And from both, you can learn really important lessons. I can't hide. I work in a very public place. If you need somebody, I mean this. This is not a joke. I mean, if you meet somebody, find me. If you can't find someone else in your circle and you want to talk to somebody about their experience, I kept this inside for way too long. People are helping me all the time. So if I can help somebody, I volunteer. Just find someone you can talk to. Exhale. Get outside. Fresh air. Maybe it doesn't work for everybody. Fresh air means it's so important to me, just to breathe and have fresh air. I live just outside of DC, above the river. I can walk down the Potomac River and the trail, the canal trail, in just a few minutes. And sometimes I'll just sit in a rock and stare at the river, and just like, okay, this, I joke and call myself Johnny Zen, right? Get down and, my Potomac Zen is to sit by the river and just like take a breath and say, oh, you're doing okay, but find some help. It's a long rambling way of saying in the way that will work for you, find some help. And then, constantly ask questions of the medical professionals. A little more than a year ago, a young new resident in my neurologist's office suggested adding an additional drug to my regimen. It's not an MS drug, and I won't explain it quite right here, but it essentially like blocks your brain from getting certain information. Since I started that drug, my legs are still heavy, but it doesn't feel like I'm throwing telephone poles out in front of me every day. Literally what it felt like. My legs were like the old wooden telephone poles, and I was like throwing them out in front of me and like, stilt walking almost. It has dramatically improved how I feel about the heaviness, the lead, as I described earlier, that moves sometimes way up into your chest. And it's helped. And that was 12 years into my journey, tried something new. So keep an open mind. I'm still on my main MS medicine is one of the oldest. I hit myself with a needle of beta-seron. It's an interferon drug. It's one of the very oldest, but it works for me. It works for me. My progression has been really, 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 really slow, and I'm so lucky. Some people, I have a colleague had a son about 2 years ago, was diagnosed, and the frustrating part for him was the first couple of drugs weren't doing anything. And it was every MRI was more lesions, and every couple months was more pronounced issues with being able to hold things and being able to walk. And he had just had a baby, and just imagine that, right? You're a physically active young person, plus you've just had a baby, and so there's all the joy in a relationship. That's also a lot more stress in a relationship to get through all that. And then they tell you have MS, and you start losing your ability. The third drug. So you try it for 3-4 months, new one 3-4 months, and the third drug, he's actually now in a pretty stable place. That can suck, excuse my language, but that's a lot of stress, right? And so find people who can help you through that. And that was after I had disclosed mine, and so I was able to help somebody. Just say I'm lucky. It was one drug. The first drug worked for me, but my doctor's awesome and his support staff is awesome, and they tell me these stories. And especially after I said, okay, I'm out of the closet now. Everybody knows. So give me more information. How can I help people? And they feed me information as well, and they're always available to me. When I have a question for somebody, and so there are resources available to you. Just find them and get them.
What I do for a living is fitness, and sort of specialize in people with multiple sclerosis. You've mentioned exercise a few times while we've been talking. Tell us about what you do, what you have done, and is it important for your disease?
It has for me, both psychologically and physically, the exercise, part of it to prove, to push yourself. It also helps you learn when you're having issues, if you're having a routine and all of a sudden it's harder. So I do a lot of incline treadmill just to keep my legs built up. And, my neurologist laughs at me. He says, this is not exactly scientific, but if it works for you, do it, right? That's a great medical team, right? He has said, I don't do this now, but I know other people who've tried acupuncture. He said, if you want to try something, try something. If it helps you, it helps you. Whether it's something I would recommend or not, whatever it is, by all means, try things that help you with the mental challenge, the discipline challenge, and the physical challenge. But I try to get outside as much as I can. Before I disclosed my diagnosis a long time ago, and the scheduling hasn't worked any time, I did the bike MS up in Massachusetts, up in Boston. It's 150 miles from Boston to Provincetown, and I couldn't feel my legs the entire time. I got through that.
That's a good thing, probably.
And helped raise some money. But the incline treadmill, to keep my legs strong, I can't feel them, but I want to know that I want to be certain in my brain that they have the physical stamina to get me through whatever I need to get through. So even if I can't feel them, I know I've worked them hard. I know they're strong enough. The fresh air, I think that part of it is more mental. Long walks outside, yes, they help you physically. I just turned 60 a few months ago, so you should be doing this anyway. MS or no MS, you should be taking care of yourself. You should be thinking, I might have to change my diet. I might have to do more of this and less of that. But it just helped for me, both physically and psychologically, of staying fit, which helps both the body and the brain. has been very important to keep the mental discipline. And when I notice what I just switched, I gave up my show and I'm traveling a lot now in the campaign year. And so for 7 years, I had a pretty good routine because my show was on the same time every day, and my kid goes to school the same time every day. So I could pretty much schedule a little bit of exercise in the morning, more in the afternoon. Now it's a lot more challenging. And I have noticed just in the last couple of months as I do this new job, that I have more brief periods, bad periods, and I can. Again, I don't have a chart to show it, but in my mind, it's when my exercise routine gets off, when I'm not exercising as much and as long. Is that MS physiological? Is that John King psychological? I can't answer that question for you, but I know that when I'm not in a good extended, I try to do 90 minutes a day.
Great.
I try to keep it as a minimum of 45 minutes a day. Some days you only get 20 minutes. Every now and then you don't even get that. I am more tired. My brain is more exhausted at the end of those days than when I push myself physically, and that tells me a lot. And so I try to push myself whenever I can.
One question we like to pose to everybody too, and I think you probably mentioned it, but we'll see what you answer. When it comes to the MS and things you've learned, maybe that one thing that you think is actually something good to come out of the diagnosis, whether it's a way of thinking or something you do in your life, what would that be for you?
I'm a much better person. I'm a more patient person. We work in a very competitive, kind of crazy business, and this has just taught me about sort of the invisible challenges. I kept this a secret for so long, successfully, right? And I could be quote unquote proud of that. I functioned. At times I was thriving at work. This is like any career. You're the flavor of the month, then you're Satan, then you're the flavor of the month, then you're Satan. That's how these careers go. You do all those things, and I've been through all those cycles in 27 years here. But when you're hiding this, and you think, "Wow, I'm great. I can barely walk today, and I'm having a hard time doing this today, and nobody knows I'm great." Just please flush that. But it is. It's made me more empathetic. It's made me realize the invisible part that that because I was able to keep it so secret for so long, how many other people are doing that? And so I hope it's made me a better, stronger person who understands that whether it's your best friend or a perfect stranger or somebody in between, they may and they will at some point in their life go through something that they're hiding from you. I don't mean that in a nefarious way, that they're just, they're dealing with something, and either it's none of your business or they haven't figured out a way to tell you yet. So be patient and don't be so judgmental. If someone else is, if somebody is suddenly acting in a weird way, don't make a judgment. Have some patience. I hope so. I hope it's made me a much better, empathetic person. I don't think I was a horrible person, but I think I was impatience is a pretty common human reflex, especially when it comes to physical things. Yeah. Get out of my way. I'm in a hurry. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And I hope I've learned a ton about that. And the idea of reach it. I don't a lot of stereotypes. Men don't ask for help, or these kind of people don't ask for help. Whether you're a man or a woman, white, black, brown, gay, straight, whatever, it's like we all need to ask for help. We all need help. We're human. We're human. And MS and challenges like MS are depressing. They're isolating. They make you lonely. They make you mad. They make you angry. Why me? And you need help in those situations. You just do. And so you might not do it in the first 10 seconds, but just find a way to find help. I say that in the context of my MS. I hope I take that into the rest of my life now. That if you need help, speak up, because especially now that people are offering me help and offering me advice and offering me input and offering me support, I feel I kept this challenge secret because I was afraid of what would happen if people knew about it. Boy, what a mistake. The support community out there is mind-numbingly awesome, and it is easier to manage something when you have friends, when you have help.
Well, same here. My story was I told people, but not on in the public fashion, as you and I, we're public, figures, and we go on. For me, it's the radio, but it wasn't until my colleague Dave Johnson came out with his, and the station said, well, why don't we rally? And it was the greatest thing. My radio station WTOP rallied around both of us and said, we want to do a fundraiser for MS. And I was like, this is a great idea. Why don't I come out and talk about this more? And I felt like, not to mention the people I've helped, that's the impact there, but just what it does for you. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just, it betters you and helps you through the process just by being open about it.
And the next thing you know, he has a podcast.
I know, right?
which is great. It just, it's everybody has to deal with this in their own way. But the thing I didn't realize at the beginning was that, I think people who are dealing with challenges, and when you visit, where I grew up in Dorchester, Massachusetts, there's a place called the Boston Home that's mostly for people with very progressive, the cruelest of the disease. And I pop in there when I go home now. And these people for whom I think, what can I do to help you? All they want to do is help me. And it just blows your mind that people who are dealing with such amazing challenges that have taken them off their feet and taken away things that they loved and loved doing are just trying to find opportunities to give to other people. It just blows your mind. And it makes you realize that, I like to be a loner sometimes, but there's something pretty amazing, pretty special about sharing your experience and sharing your struggle and sharing the successful things you've done to make today better than yesterday. And if you can give somebody one little hint that gets them a day or even a few hours in a better place, amen.
We always like to leave our listeners with hope. What is one thing what would you say is a reason for people with MS to have hope right now?
Well, I think number one, there's a much bigger, much more optimistic, much more friendly, helpful, welcoming support community than I realized when I was keeping this a secret. So you can get a lot more help, friendship, and advice right now. Another thing I will say, and I sure hope this is right, I did an interview the other day. I have a partnership with the NBA basketball, and they have technology summits every year at the All-Star Summit. And I interviewed for the technology summit the scientist who's the number one scientist at Microsoft dealing with artificial intelligence. And he was talking about how for diseases like MS, how he believes in the next 3 to 5 years, artificial intelligence will just push the limits in mind-blowing, amazing ways, because you can take, my neurologist is at Johns Hopkins, and there are neurologists here and neurologists there, take all of their brains essentially and, put them together and get them away from filling out forms and doing stuff, and have AI crunch all that for them so that the creative minds can just go into creative and finding solutions. And his prediction was that in 3 to 5 years, those of us with MS and Parkinson's and some of the other autoimmune diseases and other diseases as well, but because of my MS, we were talking in the context of that. His bet was in 3 to 5 years, we will live in a different world. And I sure hope that's true.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, John. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
I'm grateful for the chance. I really appreciate what you're doing.
I really appreciated that interview because I was a journalist as well who got the diagnosis and was trying to figure out, Nick, is it a good idea to tell the world or should I keep it to myself? I'm so glad I did. The community that I built by being open about my diagnosis, John has a similar story as well. So it was great hearing his perspective as well.
And my dad was similar to that. He told people that he had MS, I'm Good Morning America. So when he told the world, he told the world.
Sure did. And so did John when he did it right there on CNN. Well, thanks to John again. And thank you for joining us on this episode of Mastering MS. I'm Mike Murillo.
And I'm Nick Irons.
And this has been the Mastering MS podcast. Check out our website, mastering.ms.
See you next time.
Bye.